Hi, I'm Ernie Conover. This month I thought we'd look at turning a closed form bowl. We've looked at natural edges, we've looked at traditional forms, but a closed form, we're going to close the top of this bowl back in on itself and create a shape that's called a torus. It really looks like an inner tube, the outside of an inner tube, with the mouth being smaller than the interior of the bowl. There's a few problems you have in doing this kind of work. The first being that we can't continue to turn down and come down around here because we would be lifting this end grain up as we go over it. We're going to now cut in this direction. And we've got a little bit of a problem here in that we can't get on the bevel immediately, so we have to do what's called a pull cut. And we're controlling the depth that that gouge is cutting at by just holding it firmly and using the rest as a support. And there's right the center of our torus, or donut shape, and we're going to go from each side and blend that out until it's perfect. A nice tool to remove any irregularities is a big round nose scraper, which I'm actually canting here, and that allows the burr to drag a little better, and I can just drag that around and very nicely fare this all out. I've sanded the outside of this. I put one coat of finish on it. If you're turning green wood, I'm turning dry, but if you're turning green wood, it helps a lot to keep that from drying out as fast, and it doesn't warp as much while you're taking the time to excavate the inside of this bowl. I've also scraped a mortise back in here and leveled the foot out dead level. I've turned our closed form around now and mounted it on a glue block. I elected not to use a 4-jaw chuck, but a glue block. So I simply took a piece of poplar and with cyanoacrylate or super glue, I glued the bowl to a tenon I turned on that centered this. The real power of this joint is in the two flat surfaces around that tenon meeting together. It is now time to hollow out the center, and while we can get a lot of wood out of here with a bowl gouge, ultimately we're going to have to resort to a round nose scraper to get the wood out of this area of the torus shape. So without further ado, I will excavate as much wood as I can out of here, and then I'll show you how we use a scraper to finish the job. I've gone about as far as I can go with a bowl gouge. I have been able to do some undercutting under the rim, but there's a limit to how far back in there I can get. As you can see, that gouge has to come all the way out to here, come around like this, staying right on the center line of the cut, and turning it slightly to adjust to get a perfect cut. We now have to go to scrapers, and I have two scrapers that I use a lot for this kind of work, one larger than the other. The important thing here is that you don't want to have a radius that's smaller than your scraper. The inside radius should always be generous compared to the scraper itself. And this way you won't get too much of that scraper engaged. For if you get too much of that edge cutting, it will overwhelm you and you may take the piece off the faceplate. The important part of this technique is to now raise that tool rest so that you're a little above center. get it around like this so you're inside, you're well supported. I sometimes even walk to this side of the lathe to do this. But I can now go in here like this. And as I come up under the whip, I actually tilt that scraper a little so that I'm dragging that edge. And your fingers are a very good judge of how much material you need to remove. It's slow work now because you're only removing 2 or 3 thousandths per revolution. You need to sharpen scrapers more frequently than you do bowl gouges. I do my big dome scrapers for bowls on a Veritas burnishing jig, and I actually burnish a very heavy burr on there. Downhill, working it back and forth. We're just about there. I've moved my rest back. It's a little above center. I'm now going to use this big dome scraper to level out the bottom. Most of the sanding out in the inside of the torus area of this bowl is hand sanding, and it's slow and arduous. You can get an awful lot out of here with a sanding mandrel in an electric drill, and that makes this part of it fairly easy. I've sanded this up through 180 grit. I sanded wet at first, and I've now given it a coat of finish. We'll cut it off the glue block, turn it around, and finish the base. The third thing I'd like to show you about closed forms is reverse chucking. That is, reversing this and turning this off so that it looks as nice from the bottom side as it does from the top. It's not easy to create a jam chuck for work like this. Now it's a perfect candidate for vacuum chucking, but vacuum chucks are expensive. So a nice solution is just take that glue block, and I've leveled it off and rounded the edges. And now I'll put a piece of 120 grit sandpaper down in the bottom of that bowl and just bring it up against that nubbin sort of on the faceplate. Now, if you don't want to put a heavy mark in the middle there, you just now back up your tailstock and you take a little piece you turn between centers and you just slip it in here between your tailstock center. There. And you just tighten that up. And there we've got that pinned against that. That sandpaper is giving us some tooth in there so that we have positive drive. And we can turn 90% of that out of there. We'll be left with just a little bit that we can chisel off, sand out, and we'll have this without the price of a vacuum chuck. Now you want to keep your speeds kind of moderate on this kind of work. And there we have a bottom that looks just as good as the top. This is Ernie Conover saying, thanks for visiting.